my elder son, Jonah, said he really wanted cinnamon rolls. And I said, I don't know how to make cinnamon rolls. And my husband said, of course you do. And I said, no. And then I went searching. So I have a recipe for cinnamon rolls that works really well, and it's really pretty simple. So I double the recipe because we give half away and we eat the other half. So I have 8 cups of flour. I have a half of a cup of sugar. I have 2 packets of yeast, or 4.5 teaspoons. And then I have 2.5 teaspoons of salt. We're going to put that all together and just stir until it's combined. And then in a large bowl, I have 12 tablespoons of butter that I've melted, and it's slightly cool. And I'm going to add 6 eggs. Once again, this is a doubled recipe, so you don't need to make all of this. We just really like cinnamon rolls. And this will make 2 dozen. But I am giving away a dozen. So if my children see that I've made cinnamon rolls and I didn't leave any for them and I gave them all away, I would be in a whole lot of trouble. Okay, and I also have a 1.5 cups of buttermilk that I've been heating on the stove. It's going to be about 100 to 110 degrees. We need it slightly warm. I'm going to stir it in. Woo! And then I'm going to pour this into my flour mixture and head over to the mixer. So we're at our mixer with the dough hook on, and I'm going to turn it on low just to let it incorporate, and then we're going to turn it up on high so it can knead the dough. Now, I talk a lot about tempering eggs so that you don't have chunks of scrambled eggs in doughs or cakes or stuff like that. So the reason we didn't have to temper the eggs in this particular recipe is because the butter is slightly warmer than the eggs and the milk is slightly warmer than the butter. So it all tempers together instead of having to do it the way I do in a custard. So now that it's incorporated, we're going to up the speed. First I'm going to turn it off and turn my timer on because I need it for 5 minutes. We're going to mix it until it sticks to the bottom but pulls away from the sides. And yes, my mixer I have to hold because otherwise it'll fall off the table, as it is already done once. Alright, so if you notice, the dough is pulling away from the sides and it's going to come right off the hook without a whole lot of sticking to it. So what we're going to do now is dump this out into a bowl that I've already sprayed with Pam, and then cover it up with some saran wrap and let it sit for 2 hours so that the dough can rise and double in size. So what I'm going to do is scrape down the sides with my fingernails, if you can see inside there, and scoop out my dough into one big lump. And then go back through and get all the little pieces left, because we do not waste a bite of cinnamon roll. And there we are. Now I'm going to take my saran wrap. That's it, and we'll be back in 2 hours. So our cinnamon roll dough has had 2 hours to double in size, as you can tell. And now we're going to make our filling. I have a 1.5 cups of brown sugar, packed brown sugar. I have 4 teaspoons of cinnamon. And then I'm going to use a pinch of salt. And just stir these together. making sure that the cinnamon is incorporated all the way through the brown sugar. Because if you have ever gotten a mouthful of cinnamon that is not cut with some kind of sugar, it's really not yummy. I've also been known to put cloves in the middle of my cinnamon rolls, which if you like the flavor of, you're more than welcome to. But when we decided to do this, I didn't check and we're out of cloves. So if you do, just 1.5 teaspoons of cloves for your entire mixture. And don't forget that this is double, because I made 2, half to give away and half to keep. Okay, so we're going to set that filling aside for now. And then I'm going to lightly dust my surface. And I'm going to roll out half the dough at a time, because if I do double of the dough, it's too long. So all I do is guesstimate about what half is. There we go. Put this aside. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more flour over the top, and I'm going to roll it. And I want to roll it into a rectangle, or as close to a rectangle as we can get. That looks good. Now we're going to take some melted butter. I took a stick and melted it on the stove earlier. And just run it across. Leaving about a 1-inch seam on the outside that does not have butter on it. And then I'm going to take about half of my brown sugar and cinnamon mixture. Sprinkle it over the middle. Leaving that 1 inch on the outside. Just like so. Then we're going to roll it up. And you want a tight roll so you can get as many swirls of cinnamon down the middle as you can. And then we're going to gently manipulate it so that it becomes about 1.5 times its original length. Okay, then I'm going to take a serrated knife, because it's easier to cut the dough that way, and cut about 1.5 inches. And then put them in my greased pan. And you want them right up next to each other. And I put together a 14 by 14 inch pan, since I've did double of the cinnamon rolls, and I'm going to do 5 by 5. Now the recipe is supposed to make 24 when you double it, cinnamon rolls, but I'm going to make 25 because I don't want to have a hole in the middle. We're going to continue and do the same thing with the second half of the dough, and then we're going to sit this, cover it up and let it rise for another 40 minutes before we bake them. And this dough has nothing on it. No cinnamon got on it at all. So I'm just going to lump it in with the next half. Do the same thing we did before. 1, 2, 3. So we got 25 cinnamon rolls, and I like the brown sugar cinnamon filling. So whatever is left on the table, I just scoop up and sprinkle over the top. Especially getting the ones that don't have, you know, if you miss some. Now we're gonna cover this up with some saran wrap, and we're gonna wait about 40 minutes before we slide them into the oven. So it's been about 30 minutes. Our cinnamon rolls have, 40 minutes. Our cinnamon rolls have doubled in size. So now we are going to bake them in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. So our cinnamon rolls baked at 350 for about 30 minutes. Now we're going to let them cool off for the next 10 minutes, then we'll pop them out of the pan and glaze them. So our cinnamon rolls have had some time to cool. Now we're just going to pop them out of our pan. They come out pretty easily. You do have to slice them apart because they get stuck together as they cook. And we're going to set them individually on these pans. I've covered the cookie sheets in tin foil so that when we glaze them, we can just take the tin foil off and throw it away, and the sheet pan stays relatively clean. So we're just going to keep going like this until we get all of the cinnamon rolls out. And then we'll make our glaze. All right, so we've got all of the pieces out, all of the cinnamon rolls are separated, and it's time to make our glaze. So now that our cinnamon rolls are waiting, we need to make our glaze. I have 6 tablespoons of butter that I'm just going to cream. You can also use cream cheese. My family is not a fan of cream cheese in any form, so I've just switched out the butter and the cream cheese. But if you like a little tang with your cinnamon roll, feel free to use 6 tablespoons of cream cheese softened instead of the butter. Now I'm going to add 3½ cups of powdered sugar. And just get those to mix together until it's kind of like wet sand. And then we're going to add, while that's mixing, I have a teaspoon of vanilla. And then I have 6 tablespoons of half and half. Mix it for a couple minutes, and then we'll be ready to spoon it over our cinnamon rolls. And we're ready. So our glaze is made, cinnamon rolls ready. So all I do is run my ladle through one more time just to make sure that we're all one consistency. And then I spoon it over all of our cinnamon rolls. Now, some days I'm lazy and I don't pull them out and I leave them in the pan and ice them there. Then you get icing all over your pan and it's not real easy to clean. But you don't lose any icing either or the glaze, because my children will just come through and lick it off the bottom of the pan. And there we are, cinnamon rolls are iced.